a great pleasure to welcome her. And she is, I won't review her accomplishments, which are many. She has quite a list of books. Please take a look at yourselves and
buy them all.
Buy them all, exactly. Do you have any preferred books?
Comrade.
A Comrade, okay. No, it's quite extensive, and I urge you to go study her in addition to being up to date on the latest publications. And with that, I think I will simply note that she's speaking on Lenin tonight in a timely way. And again, thank you very much for being here, Jodi.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for having me. And it's been great having all of y'all. This has been really wonderful. So, 2024 is the 100th anniversary of Lenin's death. He died on January 21st. So this is 100 years and 8 months to the date of Lenin's death. And so I'm going to talk about Lenin and desire, or Lenin and the question of desire. People don't always think of Lenin as a kind of cuddly, desire-y kind of guy, but I'm going to try to open up that dimension of Lenin for us. But since the paper has a lot to do with desire, I have to start with a confession. I've had a sort of a hard time putting these remarks together because of the challenge of the perspective, like what perspective to take in talking about Lenin. So I could take an academic perspective, which would suggest, I think, going into dense historical details about nuanced points of disagreement, maybe attending to central aspects of the context in which Lenin articulated certain ideas or made certain decisions, like who was the real Lenin? Why did he do the things he did? What did Lenin want? We could consult experts, right? And then I could compile a bunch of results from what the different experts say, experts with impressive degrees and institutional affiliations. This academic perspective on Lenin tends to be critical, though very rarely self-critical. It tends to take the form of exposing and correcting others' errors. It girds itself in expertise and embeds itself in the archive, ferreting out obscure receipts and letters in order to set them up as landmines and demolish alternative points of view. Or I could adopt the perspective of a comrade, of an organizer, a militant, a party member. So rather than seeking Lenin in the archive, I would reveal and display how Lenin lives on in the practice of the Leninist party. Lenin would remain a guide to action, a resource for formulating a political line between, say, liberals and anarchists without falling into the marsh. For the organizer, Lenin isn't the name for dogma, but it's not dogmatic either. There are correct ways to do things. There are errors that can be predicted and avoided. Lenin has a lot to teach us, and as an organizer, one desires to be a better Leninist. Now, full confession, since this is a confessional mode at this point, I think and write from both perspectives, though not always at the same time. But for this lecture, I didn't want to do either one of these. I didn't feel like we were going to be involved in deep, academic examinations of Lenin, and we're not a party, right? This is not a meeting of a communist party. And but I will say I am going to get a little bit in some weeds because I can't shed the academic part completely, but I still didn't think that was going to be a good idea. Now, one place where the organizer perspective and the academic perspective overlap is in the desire to be correct, right? The right answers, the better arguments. This overlap, though, is a site of friction. What it means to be correct, or the measure of correctness, isn't the same from both perspectives. For the academic, correctness is determined by the conventions of the academy, scholarly discourse, exchange of reasons, the assent of an academic community. For the organizer, correctness is determined by the people. Did they come out or did they stay home? Did they rise up or did they stand down? Were they killed, arrested, demoralized? Or are they gaining in capacity, commitment, and reach? So you can see then why neither the perspective of the academic nor the organizer is quite right for this setting, because we actually are involved in a different set of projects here, right? A different forms of inquiry, ideas of knowledge, expanding what we think. So this then left me with a third possibility, the fangirl. Lenin won. He fought against the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie, the imperialists and the reactionaries, and he won. His commitment, follow through, ability to fail well, to learn from defeat, to be both flexible and principled, makes him the greatest of all time. He built a party and changed the world. Although culturally influential, the fangirl does not appear to be intellectually very serious. She seems undisciplined, non-critical, likely delusional in her infatuation with a distant idol. There's something childish in the fan's desire, as it hinges on impossibility more than on balanced assessment. Attached to an impossible object, erotic intensity becomes safe and unthreatening. The desire can be expressed because it can't be fulfilled. What fulfillment might entail is impossible to imagine, as we see in the screams of crowds lining a red carpet while celebrities walk by, or in our experiences of speechlessness when we meet our idols face to face. These drawbacks aside, the fangirl perspective does own and name something that the academic and the organizer fight against, deny, or repress: jouissance, enjoyment. Some people were talking earlier about a drinking game with jouissance, so here we go. The fan fervently, perhaps too fervently, enjoys. This excessive quality of the fan's relation to its object is often what makes us uncomfortable. The posters all over a teenager's room, their lack of self-consciousness in their enthusiasm, it's so extra. And when it comes to Lenin, it might even be dangerous. What is this an enthusiasm for? Revolution? Absolute power? Communism? An end so great that it justifies any means necessary to its achievement? At any rate, one of the advantages of the fangirl perspective is its attention to enthusiasm and enjoyment. Another advantage is that the perspective is not anchored in knowledge. It's non-critical because fandom isn't about being correct or incorrect. It's about truth, the subjectivizing effect that gives desire its form, right? And I'm using this distinction between truth and knowledge from Lacan, by way of Zizek. For the fangirl, even if X or Y is well documented, Lenin is wonderful, and the name Lenin gives form to aspirations for organizing revolutionary struggle. Or sure, X or Y might have been a mistake or an unappealing personality feature, but Lenin ushered in world communism. The perspective that I'm calling fangirl then is the perspective of the subject of the Lenin event. Now, these three perspectives generally intertwine, albeit unevenly, and with varying degrees of acknowledgement and disavowal. For example, the academic perspective may involve a little falling in love with its object, but it might just as well be driven by something else, perhaps an intense effort to displace or demolish its object of study. Some people write about Lenin in order to bring him down, to destroy communism as a movement and aspiration. They might be fans of a villain, usually the most interesting character in a drama. And they may be attached to their own cause, whether cautious, conserving, or reactionary. Likewise, the organizer perspective can be pulled to and informed by both the academic and the fangirl perspectives. I mean, who hasn't witnessed organizers invoking the names of their heroes to buttress their own authority? So my point is not that one perspective is better than the others. It's that attention to the fangirl perspective, or, more formally put, the attention to Lenin as the name for a subjectifying event and subjective process, makes the horizon of the discussion clear: communism. Now, I want to talk about the woman question and consider how these different perspectives play out with respect to Lenin and women. The academic starts with important facts about Lenin's position on the woman question. From his early writing on the development of capitalism in Russia, through his later concerns with building socialism in the new Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Lenin took great interest in the conditions facing women. According to his analysis, along with national oppression and religious privilege, women's inferior status was a feudal holdover, one that few bourgeois revolutions actually addressed. Lenin frequently noted how on this basic democratic measure of women's equality, the Bolshevik Revolution easily outshone the bourgeois democratic republics. We could say anyone who is not prepared to answer the woman question should not talk about the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly. Lenin and the Bolsheviks more generally not only supported equal political rights for women and men, but recognized the right to divorce and abolished the distinction between legitimate and illegitimate birth. The right to divorce is particularly interesting as it overlaps with the national question. Freedom, self-determination depends on the equal right to decide whether to unite and combine. Rather than a formula for fragmentation, it's the premise for the political equality of oppressed or formerly oppressed people. Lenin never stopped emphasizing that rights are not enough for women's emancipation. They're just the beginning. In a speech from September 1919 on the task of the working women's movement in the Soviet Republic, he stated, "You all know that even when women have full rights, they still remain downtrodden because all housework is left to them. In most cases, housework is the most unproductive, the most savage, and the most arduous work a woman can do. It is exceptionally petty and does not include anything that would in any way promote the development of the woman." To solve this problem, the new Soviet government endeavored to establish nurseries and rooms for nursing mothers at workplaces employing women. They endeavored to establish maternity centers and educational programs. Socializing labor like cooking, laundry, and childcare would free women from the yoke of tradition and let them engage fully in the project of building socialism. Quote, "The chief thing is to get women to take part in socially productive labor, to liberate them from domestic slavery, to free them from their stupefying and humiliating drudgery and the eternal drudgery in the kitchen and the nursery," he said. Lenin's approach to the woman question was tied to the agrarian question. Collectivization was the resolution of both, and only with the elimination of small peasant farms would women be completely emancipated. This collectivization wasn't a romantic throwback to the Russian peasant commune. For Lenin, the error of the left Narodnik view was clear, and the condition of women helped him prove his point. Quote, "Left Narodniks will be backed by dotards, who, in addition to defending restrictions to the freedom of mobilization, defend belief in the devil, servility, flogging, cohabitation with daughters-in-law, and instructing the womenfolk with a cudgel," end quote. Lenin recognized the harshness of capitalism and industrialization, but saw them as ultimately progressive. Not only did they increase productivity and development, but they broadened mentalities, expanding people's consciousness and breaking down the slavishness that kept them down. Participation in social production enables women to escape patriarchal isolation. Now, despite the intrinsically fascinating nature of the complex class struggle of the late 19th century Russian peasantry, especially as Lenin's approach to it overlaps with his analysis of the woman question, it might seem so far that in my discussion, something is missing. Sex. What about sex? I'm tempted to dismiss interest in sexual questions as bourgeois feminist, but that's incorrect. Lenin viewed sex as a social matter, not an issue of individual choice or preference, at the very least because of sex's link to reproduction and the possible creation of new life. Lenin also recognized a revolution in sex and marriage occurring together with the proletarian revolution. How people will relate to each other as the old norms, with all their accompanying hypocrisy, filth, and inequality for women, how they will relate to each other as these norms decay, that's a communist question. Lenin noted with some dismay that it was also a question that greatly engaged the youth at a time when they should have been concentrating their energies on the revolution. Sex raises organizational issues. Lenin explained to Claire Zetkin, the revolution calls for concentration and rallying of every nerve by the masses and by the individual. It does not tolerate orgiastic conditions so common among D'Annunzio's decadent heroes and heroines. Promiscuity in sexual matters is bourgeois. It is a sign of degeneration. The proletariat is a rising class. It does not need an intoxicant to stupefy or stimulate it, neither the intoxicant of sexual laxity or of alcohol. It should and will not forget the vileness, the filth, and the barbarity of capitalism. It derives its strongest inspiration to fight from its class position, from the common ideal. What it needs is clarity, clarity, and more clarity. Therefore, I repeat, there must be no weakening, no waste, and no dissipation of energy. Self-control and self-discipline are not slavery, not in matters of love either. Well, I mean, who could disagree that the communist revolution requires everything? Revolutionaries need to know when to focus on what. Alexandra Kollontai had clarity on this score. It would be inexpedient, she writes, to waste the inner strength of the members of the collective on experiences that did not directly serve the revolution. So for Lenin and Kollontai, sex depends on timing. Kollontai's and Lenin's views overlap significantly. Both rejected the glass of water. I'm so glad I have this prop. Both rejected the glass of water theory, which said that sex should be as inconsequential as getting a glass of water. Nevertheless, they're generally presented or positioned as opponents. She was sex positive, he was uptight and repressed. She embraces eros, while he is the self-proclaimed gloomy ascetic. But this is where the fangirl perspective has something to contribute. Lenin wasn't really ascetic. He had a kitten and trained his dog to do tricks. He liked going for hikes in the mountains and walks in the woods. He had a zest for life. His wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, recounts, Vladimir Ilyich was always being enthusiastic over somebody or other. When he called himself a gloomy ascetic, Lenin was joking in a charmingly self-effacing manner, exaggerating for comic effect. In that same conversation with Clara Zetkin, where he calls himself a gloomy ascetic, Lenin said, communism should not bring asceticism, but joy and strength, stemming, among other things, from a consummate love life. He added, the obtaining plethora of sex life yields neither joy nor strength. On the contrary, it impairs them. And this is bad, very bad indeed, in the epoch of revolution. Communism is about joy, and the goal of the revolution is to bring about new conditions for collective joy. Kind of like a communist Marie Kondo. She was all about, separating and cleaning up everything. For Lenin, for the fangirl, Lenin sparks joy because he's about bringing about joy. Now, the Lenin of enthusiasm and joy doesn't fit well with the common presentation of Lenin as an austere and dogmatic revolutionary. So where does this come from? Various academics and biographers blame Nikolai Chernyshevsky's 1863 novel, What Is to Be Done? I don't know, any of y'all read Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done? It is very long and not very good, written and published while Chernyshevsky was in prison. It was really super popular in Russian revolutionary circles, and Lenin uses the title in his influential text on party organization and tactics. Various academics and biographers claim that Lenin likely modeled himself after the protagonist of the book, Rakhmetov. I'm going to refute this idea, so I'm going to get in the academic woods, but a little bit with a fangirl perspective. So the argument's going to be that Lenin is not Rakhmetov, and that was not his model, and that every academic and biographer who says he was is wrong. So let me first establish that various academics and biographers do, in fact, make this claim regarding Chernyshevsky, Rakhmetov, and Lenin. Leszek Kolakowski, in Main Currents of Marxism, published in 1978, writes that What Is to Be Done did much to popularize the moral style of radical circles, marked by doctrinarism, fanaticism, sincerity and self-sacrifice, the cult of science, and the lack of a sense of humor, end quote. Kolakowski describes Lenin as an ideal specimen of the type which Chernyshevsky portrayed. Robert Service goes further, explaining that the main character of the novel was pure of spirit and endowed with the aura of an unchallenged leader. It is a good bet that Vladimir Ulyanov identified closely with him, end quote. In the same vein, Orlando Figes observes that Lenin's own ascetic lifestyle bore a disturbing resemblance to Rakhmetov's. Rakhmetov, with his superhuman will and selfless dedication to the cause, was the perfect model of the Bolshevik. Even Tariq Ali describes the hero of what is to be done as a dedicated and ascetic revolutionary who sacrifices all for the cause. So what's the problem here? The problem is that Rakhmetov is not the protagonist, hero, or main character of what is to be done. The main character of the novel, which one would never know from reading these guys, is a woman, Vera Pavlovna. Vera Pavlovna is able, and I'm going to give a little bit of summary of the novel, Vera Pavlovna is able to avoid a loveless marriage that her base and conniving mother tries to force her into by marrying a progressive man, Lopukov. They reject traditional marriage, respecting each other's separate spaces and treating each other with equal respect. Vera Pavlovna sets up a dressmaking operation, employing seamstresses, paying them high wages, and redistributing the profits back to them. She engages the seamstresses in management and planning. Over time, the operation expands into a consumer collective, a bank, and a communal household. Vera Pavlovna isn't completely fulfilled, however, and so she falls in love with Lopukov's best friend, Kirsanov. Wanting to ensure Vera Pavlovna's happiness, Lopukov fakes his own death. So now she is free to marry his friend. With her emotional needs now met and the dressmaking operation successfully employing and housing seamstresses and their families in a prospering commune, Vera Pavlovna realizes that she really wants to be a doctor, so she begins studying medicine. Lopukov, who had gone to the United States, joined the Abolitionist Party, and got involved in business, then returns to St. Petersburg as Charles Beaumont. He marries a friend of Vera Pavlovna's and Kirsanov's, right? His best friend who she fell in love with. The two couples take up adjoining apartments, receiving guests, having parties, and going on picnics with their large circle of friends. The novel also includes 4 extended dream sequences where a goddess that sometimes goes by the name Love of Humanity appears to Vera Pavlovna. As if that's not enough, the author Chernyshevsky, periodically inserts himself into the text, addressing the perspicacious reader and telling him what to expect. Rakhmetov, the character that all those expert guys say is the novel's protagonist, appears primarily in a section of about 30 pages in the middle of this 500-page book with a couple of brief references elsewhere. He shows up following Lopukov's fake suicide to let Vera Pavlovna see a letter explaining Lopukov's analysis of the whole love situation involving Kirsanov and to give her his own lecture about what they should have all done. Now, Chernyshevsky presents Rakhmetov as an extraordinary man. In fact, the section of the novel in which Rakhmetov is featured is called An Extraordinary Man. From a noble background, Rakhmetov traveled around Russia, working on barges, forging iron, chopping wood, and so on. In US folk culture, this would be like Paul Bunyan. I think a lot of different ethnic groups have their own folk heroes of this sort. So the nickname for Rakhmetov is Nikitushka Lomov, after a Russian folk hero. To develop his strength, Rakhmetov dedicated himself to gymnastics and limits his diet largely to meat, a point emphasized by various academics and Lenin biographers who always omit the scene where Rakhmetov consumes a lot of cakes and tea with cream. For the most part, though, Rakhmetov lives an austere life, denying himself wine and women, but this is only after he had an affair with his father's mistress when he was 15. He sleeps on a strip of felt and once on a bed of nails to improve his ability to withstand imprisonment. His only vice is cigars. He smokes cigars all the time, almost as if to remind us of his virility despite his sexual abstinence. Vera Pavlovna, our main character who started the dressmaking operation, Vera Pavlovna found him boring. In one of his intrusions into the text, Chernyshevsky scolds the perspicacious reader for thinking that Rakhmetov would become the main character, because he clearly outshined Lapukov and Kirsanov. And he scolds the perspicacious reader for predicting that Vera Pavlovna will fall in love with him. Nothing of the kind occurs, the intrusive author announces. He'll play neither a principal role nor a secondary one, nor any role at all in the rest of my novel. Now, Lenin was a huge Chernyshevsky fan. He read What Is to Be Done 5 times. He kept 2 photos of Chernyshevsky in his scrapbook. He even wrote him a letter once, but never got a response. In his memoirs of getting to know Lenin while exiled in Geneva in 1904, the former Menshevik Nikolai Valentinov recounts a conversation he had with Lenin about Chernyshevsky's novel, What Is to Be Done. Valentinov expresses amazement that anyone could enjoy What Is to Be Done. Quote, "It would be difficult to imagine anything more untalented, crude, and at the same time pretentious." Lenin gets flushed and angry and retorts, "How could such a monstrous and absurd idea come into your mind to describe as crude and untalented a work of Chernyshevsky, the greatest and most talented representative of socialism before Marx?" Lenin rants on that Chernyshevsky completely transformed his outlook and that the novel provides inspiration for a lifetime. Lenin loved Chernyshevsky. There's no doubt about it. This doesn't mean, though, that he identified with Rakhmetov. Such an identification is unlikely, given how in his own What Is to Be Done, Lenin describes the second period of the development of Russian social democracy as the youth breaking with the revolutionary heroic tradition of Narodnaya Volya and abandoning their prior worship of terrorist heroes, right? Lenin's What Is to Be Done is a break with the Narodniki, not an embrace and celebration of them. Incidentally, unlike the various academics and biographers who cite him, Valentinov actually doesn't, like Valentinov, who had the conversation with Lenin, he doesn't even imply that Lenin identified with Rakhmetov, right? Valentinov doesn't even mention Rakhmetov. Claudia Verhoeven's, she's a contemporary historian, Claudia Verhoeven's brilliant study of the birth of the image of the Russian terrorist provides really important context here. She argues that Chernyshevsky's Rakhmetov was not the source of this image of the revolutionary at all. The original figure was Dmitry Karakozov, who on April 4th, 1866, shot at Tsar Alexander II, but missed. Karakozov was sickly and suicidal, but he gets mapped back onto the exceptional man, Rakhmetov, in the effort to construct political meaning around the attack on the Tsar. Verhoeven emphasizes how the mapping of the depressed Karakozov onto Rakhmetov distorts readings of Chernyshevsky's novel. Not only is the fact that Rakhmetov is frequently described as funny left out, but so is the way that the novel is a joyful book. What Is to Be Done, Verhoeven writes, quote, "teaches readers how to live while waiting for the possible to become real." So it's no wonder Lenin loved it, right? The book is not about asceticism, it's about joy. Verhoeven notes that readers viewed What Is to Be Done as a guide to life. Presumably, someone reading the book 5 times has a more complex relationship with the text than a reductive identification with a single character occupying 30 pages. Most likely, such a reader moves in and out of multiple identifications and is enamored of different aspects of the book at different times. They fall in love with a milieu, a feeling, a vision of the possible. But if one is committed to the view that enjoyment of a novel depends on identification with a single character, why not conclude that Lenin identified with Vera Pavlovna? We know from Lenin's conversation with Clara Zetkin that he is perfectly comfortable identifying with a woman, maybe even joyful about it. Zetkin describes how Their conversation ran late, and Lenin turns to her with a smile, making a jocular remark. You know, Clara, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I was conversing with a woman and will name the notorious female loquacity as the excuse for being late, although this time it was the man and not the woman who did most of the talking. Lenin playfully makes himself the woman. So why not expect an identification with Vera Pavlovna to be at least part of his infatuation with what is to be done? She's the main character. She's an organizer. She dreams of a better world. Her fourth dream culminates in a vision of a new Russia where people can enjoy themselves and where people can enjoy themselves completely and know the full ecstasy of pleasure. They burst with health and strength and lead lives full of work and enjoyment. The dream goddess tells Vera Pavlovna that she herself has proven that people can live free lives. Quote, one only has to be rational to know how to organize and to learn how to use resources most advantageously. That sounds pretty Leninist to me. Vera Pavlovna expresses a desire associated with women, but found in anyone in the throes of romantic longing, a desire not to be tormented by love. She talks to Kirsanov about that time in their relationship when she was still married to Lopukov, but unable to be without Kirsanov. Kirsanov assures her that he was feeling the same way, but Vera Pavlovna says, no, there was a difference. He had work that could be neither neglected nor postponed. She did not. Of course, she had the dressmaking enterprise, but that wasn't the same as work that was utterly necessary. A person with that kind of work, she says, is incomparably stronger. Vera Pavlovna cries, can we really be occupied by convictions when we're being tormented by feelings? No, we need a personal cause, one our life depends on, a cause that for me personally, for my way of life, for my own means, for my whole position, for my entire fate would be more important than all the impulses of my passion. Only such a cause could serve as a support in the struggle against passion. Only such a cause would not be forced out of life by passion, but would itself suppress all passion. Only such a cause would provide both strength and rest. I want such a cause. Freedom through a cause that provides strength and rest. This isn't asceticism, but fulfillment of life. We can be equal when we experience ourselves and each other as equally indispensable, equally necessary for building a better common world. I imagine Lenin as attached less to any specific character in what is to be done than to the dream that we can organize ourselves and make this world. It's a dream of collectivity and collective desire. Kollontai uses the term love comradeship to describe such a dream. In Make Way for Winged Eros, where she also refers to Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done, Kollontai notes love's organizing character, its importance in the development of collective solidarity. She attends to love for one's work, for a cause, and for the collective, pointing out how bourgeois possessive love puts these in conflict with the pull of the couple and the family. Quote, only the ideology and the lifestyle of the new laboring humanity can unravel this complex problem of emotion. Chernyshevsky's new people in What is to be Done have done precisely this. The novel concludes with happy lyrical descriptions of picnics, discussions, mutuality, people interconnected with each other through bonds of care and respect. Kollontai captures the change in love that comes about when collective love replaces couple love. She writes, the blind, all-embracing, demanding passions will weaken. The sense of property, the egotistical desire to bind the partner to one forever, the complacency of the man, and the self-renunciation of the woman will disappear. At the same time, the valuable aspects and elements of love will develop. Respect for the right of the other's personality will increase, and a mutual sensitivity will be learned. Men and women will strive to express their love not only in kisses and embraces, but in joint creativity and activity. The task of proletarian ideology is not to drive Eros from social life, but to rearm him according to the new social formation and to educate sexual relationships in the spirit of the great new psychological force of comradely solidarity. Hope for and attachment to such a vision makes much more sense for a fan of Chernyshevsky, someone who will read his massive tome 5 times, than identification with a lone folk hero showing up for a mere 30 pages. How to organize desire, how to organize so that our desires can change and evolve and be better and make us better than before. What is to be done, Lenin's and Chernyshevsky's, are about organizing desire, not the political efficacy of the lone terrorist revolutionary. Now, what might explain the bad reading that associates Lenin with Rakhmetov? As I mentioned, Claudia Verhoeven gives us context in the failed attempt on Tsar Alexander II and the emergence of a certain image of the revolutionary, and that's important. The fangirl perspective can add something else. The various academics and biographers have a reductive understanding of sex. In his contribution to the fabulous new volume, Lenin, The Heritage We Don't Renounce, edited by Hjalmar Joffrey Eichhorn and Patrick Anderson, David Pavon Queller reminds us that, quote, sexual links cannot be reduced only to genital intercourse, but are what internally animates what is alive in society, culture, and history. They are what unfold in comradeship, revolutionary struggle, and the various prefigurations of communism, end quote. Likely misogynists in their failure to recognize Vera Pavlovna as the main character of the book, and perhaps unable to escape their own fantasies of a strong man with a big cigar, the various academics and biographers can't see the joy of love comradeship that must have attracted Lenin. Their short-sightedness lets them position Lenin in a double bind. He is either dour and unappealing because he is an ascetic like Rakhmetov, or he's a hypocrite who wanted to be like Rakhmetov but failed because of his relationship with Inessa Arman. Right? That's a story. Did Lenin have this relationship? Did he not? Was it a throuple? Whatever. But both takes depend on a truncated, possessive, genital, bourgeois version of love, exemplified not least by their regressive characterizations of the comparative physical attractiveness of Krupskaya and Arman. Right? These biographer guys, the ones who like to bring up Inessa Arman are like, oh, Lenin must have been involved with her because she was so much prettier than Krupskaya. And they tend to downplay the fact that all 3 of them were very close friends and that Krupskaya writes very fondly of Inessa in her own biography of Lenin. But so I think that these biographers are basically misogynist and have like a really narrow understanding of sex. But Lenin was not an ascetic. Inspired by Chernyshevsky and like Kollontai, Lenin had an expanded vision of love for work, a cause, and the collective. His deep relationship with Inessa Arman, which was intertwined with their revolutionary work and included the close friendship between Arman and Krupskaya, it can't be evaluated according to the standards of possessive bourgeois couple love. Whatever sex someone is having is just one connection among many intense and extended bonds of collectivity. Like Bolshevik notions of revolution and the party, the extended erotics of love comradeship may seem outmoded today. In some organization and movement spaces, there's a great deal of anxiety around sex. People are viewed as predators and victims rather than as comrades. Nuanced calculations of privilege and hierarchy replace suppositions of equality. Desire is policed in the interest of maintaining safety and security. Suspicion supplies its own erotics of paranoia and punishment. Rather than strengthening solidarity and comradeship, barbed eros, that's a term from Kollontai, barbed eros divides groups, sometimes from within, but also from without, as self-designated internet sex cops spread accusations and lies, getting off by feeling that they have the power to destroy. In a communicative capitalist context, where intense images of sex and violence swirl around economically vulnerable and often socially insecure and isolated people, it's no wonder that we aren't sure how to act, how to make each other feel appreciated as comrades, and how not to have our intentions misinterpreted. The lonely and confused sometimes treat movement spaces as dating apps, face-to-face communist Tinder. They come into politics in pursuit of individual pleasure rather than collective power. Because we lack the background of joyful unity and comradeship that could enable us to guide one another into better behaviors, we too often remain trapped in carceral and individualistic mindsets. As Kollontai writes, modern love always sins. This then is where the organizer comes into play, perhaps with a slogan one of my comrades picked up in Cuba: high discipline, high morale. With proper organization, love for the collective, and the struggle and the revolution replaces self-preoccupation. Our ideal becomes not the unadorned sexual instinct, but the many-faceted love experience of love comradeship Kollontai rightly describes. She notes that this puts constraints on sexual behavior. The revolution is worth it. Abolishing capitalism and imperialism are worth it. The building of new kinds of relationships in a new egalitarian society is worth it. Just like the party comes into the workers' struggle from the outside, so does it come into the problem posed by the couple from the outside, where outside means a location strengthened by the focus on the primary thing, revolution. Of course, this is all the more difficult the greater our distance from revolution. Perversely, we can distort our understanding of the party perspective by assigning to it responsibility for intervening into personal matters as if it were some kind of cop or counselor. This then drags the party into the marsh. The party's actual responsibility is keeping the focus on revolution. That's why we join, and that's what we have to cultivate. The heart of the desire question, the woman question, was never free love. It's revolution. Some people like looking back to Lenin's correspondence with Inessa Arman on free love. A couple of the surviving letters include Lenin's critical commentary on a pamphlet Arman was writing on the demand for free love. She never published it, and so far no copies of the draft have appeared. Lenin's critique is quite scathing. His letters might seem to give clues to their relationship, perhaps exhibiting symptoms of repressed desire. But I think we should just read them straightforwardly. And his critique of Arman. Like, so some people want to say, oh, he's criticizing the free love stuff because this is really all about their relationship. That actually is not consistent with everything else in any of their letters or writing. Lenin emphasizes the political and organizational importance of bringing out the contrast between proletarian and bourgeois approaches to love. For bourgeois ladies, free love means freedom from childbirth and freedom to commit adultery. For proletarian women, free love is so much more. Freedom from material care and consideration, from patriarchal religious and social norms, from the shackles of law, courts, and police. Even calling this free love obscures the extent of the transformation necessary to realize the proletarian demand. So Lenin criticizes Arman for failing to make this distinction between bourgeois and proletarian free love. Right? And he thinks that her failure to make this distinction opens up possibilities for misinterpretation. He makes a related political point in a later letter. One should know how to combine the struggle for democracy and the struggle for the socialist revolution, subordinating the first to the second. In this lies the whole difficulty. In this is the whole essence. In that letter, Lenin criticizes Rosa Luxemburg and other comrades for failures of political analysis. They lose sight of the main thing, the socialist revolution. The main thing has to provide the orientation for everything else. So to conclude, in his contribution to Lenin, The Heritage We Don't Renounce, Michael Neokosmos writes, Emancipatory politics for Lenin then consists in addressing current struggles in such a way that they are subordinated in thought and practice to a communist vision of the future, end quote. Neocosmos correctly emphasizes how Lenin devised a politics that was irreducible to economic trends, however progressive they may be. Consideration of the desire question lets us see that the same holds for trends around sex and gender. What matters is organizing for revolution. That's the main thing that subordinates everything else. As the fangirl joyfully insists, Lenin got it right. It's organizing for revolution.